Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. Just to give you some quick background about myself. I'm Joe Del Sindaco. I'm an advisor to the Energy Improvement Corporation. My background primarily has been about 20 years in the private sector and 20 years in the government sector. I was a town councilman in Bedford, New York, a supervisor in Bedford, New York. Then I was COO of Empire State Development for 5 years and CFO of the New York Power Authority for 6 years. So I left right at the end of the Patterson administration when there was a New York State incentive for the retirement package. I'm going to just go to the next slide. I'm going to talk about the Energy Improvement Corporation and the programs that we provide. We are a local development corporation. We were created basically with funding by the US DOE and by NYSERDA, and we've received some additional funding from the Green Bank as well. And the subject I'm going to focus on today is our finance product, PACE financing, which I'll get into in more detail. The next slide. So the issue we're talking about today is the ability to finance energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. And as you can see from this slide, this data was presented by NYSERDA that talks about how much money is wasted in New York State by not taking advantage of opportunities to make our buildings more efficient and to utilize renewable energy. And the reason why this is not happening is what we're talking about today and the program we're offering to make that issue go away. So next slide. Communities need low-cost financing to make projects like this available. And the programs that have been available primarily through the commercial marketplace have not been attractive from a cost standpoint, from a cost of term standpoint, and they haven't allowed for the opportunity to be able to upgrade buildings throughout New York State. Next slide. So we've created PACE. Now PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy, and its origin goes back to the second Bush administration. The program was initiated at the federal level, and then the New York State legislature passed a resolution to provide for a mechanism that allows for the private sector to work with the public sector to provide a mechanism to allow for energy efficiency and renewable energy financing to take place throughout the entire state of New York. PACE is a nationwide program. Most of the states have adopted PACE. From a success standpoint, California has been far and away the largest in the country. They've done, I think, over $100 million in financings. And oddly enough, a state as small as Connecticut has actually been a very successful state, and they actually have done well over $40 or $50 million in PACE financing. So New York State is starting to get this program rolling, but we've been sort of impressed with how much Connecticut has accomplished in such a small state. Next slide. The program that we're talking about, again, deals with financing primarily commercial properties, and I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. But we also work with the communities that become members of the Energy Improvement Corporation to advance the program, make the information available to the community so that the constituents within the community know that this program is available. Next slide. I'm going to try to go through these as quickly as possible, but some I'll dwell on a little bit more. What we want to focus on, in addition to the environmental benefit, is the economic development benefit. What happens is when we make these buildings more efficient, we also make them more attractive. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to go into a community and upgrade the buildings to the point where they're more efficient, they're more competitive, and then they're more attractive in the marketplace. So there is savings that's generated by the introduction of this financing by reducing the cost of energy that the building is consuming, and that's freeing up money that allows that money to go back into the community. And the next slide, we talk not only about economic development, but we talk about job creation. When we finance projects like this, traditionally what will happen is there will be direct employees that are involved actually in the work of backing the capital investment for energy efficiency or renewable energy. But those jobs create support jobs, the indirect jobs. So there's a very significant economic development factor here that works within the community. And more importantly, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but as we go in and create these programs with the community, We also educate the contractors within the community as well as the property owners within the community to make them aware of the fact that this program is available. So it's not only creating jobs, but it's creating jobs, most importantly, within the communities that are adopting this program. What makes PACE very unique as it relates to commercial financing, and I'll spend some time on this slide, is number one, and this is really important, we can finance 100% of the capital investment. So many times, especially in the commercial marketplace, they are reluctant to utilize their own capital and not in a position to utilize their own capital. What PACE offers is the ability to provide 100% of all the financing necessary to do either an energy efficiency or renewable energy project. And we allow for very low interest rates to be able to do this financing. We provide for terms that go out as long as 20 years. Now, obviously, we would never finance a project beyond its useful life. But the reason why the long-term financing is so important is because what we found in this industry is many times when someone looks at upgrading a building, they overlook a lot of the subtle aspects of the improvements that can provide for energy efficiency savings. We call those deep upgrades, but many times they take a little bit longer for the payback. So now with financing at 100% and with terms as long as 20 years, we're able to go in and find every little opportunity for savings in that building to reduce the energy cost that that building is consuming. And this generates positive cash flow for the property owner. Another aspect of PACE that we think is very important is what we've learned in this industry is a lot of times a property owner does not want to undertake a financing because they don't know how long they're going to own that building. And they don't want to be in a situation where a loan gets accelerated at the time in which they need to sell it, and it might reduce the attractiveness of the building. Because this benefit is going to the building and therefore staying with the owner of the building, the financing remains in place. So the property owner doesn't have to worry about the anxiety of, well, if I take on financing and then I sell the building, I have to pay off the loan. They don't do that. The term of the financing stays from the original term because it's benefiting that owner or the new owner of the building. I talked a little bit about the job creation goals and sustainability, but I also want to talk about just improving the building stock within the community, because again, I want to reinforce that point because I think it's very important. Next slide. We have a very robust way in which we evaluate the efficiency of the project and the applicability of the financing. Number one, obviously the program has to pay for itself. So what I mean by that is that the cost of financing has to be less than the savings. So there has to be positive cash flow as a result of doing the financing. In the past, we were capped at 10% of the appraised, not the assessed, but the appraised value of the building. We just went through a change in legislation. Fortunately, it was passed unanimously by the Senate, and there were 2 negative votes in the Assembly, and the governor is about to sign the bill now, which allows for the financing to go up from 10% to 35%. And it's very important in upstate New York, where when this program was created in southeastern New York, we were looking at property values that were very high. In upstate New York, because the property values weren't that high, the 10% became an impediment. So we had to go back to the legislature and get them to make that change. So they did pass that change, and we're just waiting for it to be signed. The governor's supposed to sign it by September 13th. We also will not finance a heavily leveraged property. So for example, if a property right now has a mortgage or a debt ratio of greater than 80%, we won't finance it. And the combination of the existing financing and the PACE financing cannot exceed 90% of the appraised value of the property. We will not finance any property that has been through bankruptcy in the last 7 years. We will not finance any property that has not been current on their property taxes in the last 3 years. And what is very important here is we won't finance anything unless the bank that is holding a security interest in the property approves the financing. We just don't want to get anybody in trouble with the bank that's been supporting their financing for a period of years. Next slide. There is no public money used to finance these projects, and I think this is extremely important. All of the financing that is done by the Energy Improvement Corporation is done by the issuance of bonds, which we issue, and the bonds are purchased by Bank of America or KeyBank. Bank of America has been by far the largest partner. They've committed $75 million to the purchase of the bonds. They're very interested in the financing. They've been very supportive of the financing. And just to sort of take you through the process, it's relatively simple. But what would happen is if a property owner decided they want to go forward, we would finance the project. We bundle these packages into a bond. The bank would then buy those bonds. The municipality then that becomes a member would collect the repayment of the bonds through a line on a property tax bill. They would reimburse that money to the trustee that's entrusted in controlling all of the funds, and then they would pay the purchaser of the bonds back, which for the most part would be the Bank of America. Next slide. We talked about eligibility. One of the programs that we talked about here is the financing. The financing is limited to commercial property. So by commercial, I mean very easily, it could be commercially owned, it could be a not-for-profit. It cannot be single-family residential. We're not in a position to be able to do that right now. So that's really the only segment in the marketplace that we can't serve. We can do residential, but it has to be of a multifamily nature. Basically, there's a lot of complications for this, which I don't want to bore everybody with, but it really has to do more with federal legislation and the problems associated with doing that. It's not that we don't want to do residential. When the legislation was passed, it was passed with the intent of doing residential, but again, there are problems right now in the residential marketplace, so we're excluding that segment at the moment. Next slide. I talk about eligibility of the improvements. The best way, I think, to describe the energy efficiency nature of the projects is if you can imagine anything that can be improved in that building that will reduce the existing building's energy cost, it's eligible. So it's a very broad category as it relates to energy efficiency. With renewables, it's pretty simple. I mean, that's like solar, that could be geothermal, it could be wind. We're doing more and more solar, and we're starting to see more and more solar applications as well. Next slide. I wanted to take you through some examples of projects that we financed, because I think it's important to sort of help you understand. This was a not-for-profit in Rye, the city of Rye, New York, the Wainwright House, and it was very popular as a community center within the city. In the next slide, we talk a little bit about the structure. They were unable to secure the financing they needed to make this property more energy efficient. And as you can see, the project cost was a little over $300,000. So they were just unable to get the financing from any commercial source. The representatives of the community house went to the city council. They explained the situation to them. The Rye City Council passed the legislation to allow this to happen. And now what they've been able to do is dramatically upgrade the efficiency of the building, and as you can see on the bottom line, they're also saving $4,000 a year. So they're actually spending $4,000 a year less than they were spending before because the energy efficiency has saved them that much more money. Next slide, we're talking about, this is an agricultural use. I like to talk about this because this was the first project we ever financed. It's in Orange County in Goshen, New York. It was actually sponsored when the governor introduced the REV program. And in the next slide, when we get into the economics, we can talk about this. But just to give you some background, I had the opportunity to speak with the county executive at a Chamber of Commerce breakfast, and the owners of the dairy were in the audience. And they had been looking for a way to finance solar for their farm for a while, and they had not been able to find a mechanism to do it. They heard my presentation. They went to David Church, who's the commissioner of planning for the county. He directed them to basically to us and to a solar installer, and they were able to do this project. And it's an amazingly efficient project because you can see how much money they've saved. And under the project, $15,000 a year is what they're saving by utilizing solar energy now to power the farm. So this was a large field that they put all of the solar panels in. It was a project that they did in conjunction with NYSERDA, but again, we funded it, and it's an important agricultural use. Next slide. The next slide, again, is talking about a housing project, and you can flip to the next slide if you don't mind. The reason why I like to point this out is because it talks about the dramatic savings that's available if you utilize this financing for energy improvement. Now, in this example, you see the option that they had of financing the project over 5 years or financing the project over 20 years. So at $500,000, which is the total cost of this project, by financing it for as short a period as 5 years, they were able to save over $16,000 a year. But yet the investment that they were making was such that if they wanted to go out as far as 20 years, they could, and they could have saved $56,000 a year by stretching that financing out for a longer period of time. So it goes to show how much money that could be saved by upgrading these buildings and making them more efficient. Next slide. This was an example. I'll go through this one quickly. This was a tile and marble company in Otsego, New York. And the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the benefits as well. But this was a project that they undertook with just slightly $400,000. And again, if you look at the savings under the project section, $26,000 a year was their cost savings for undertaking the financing. Again, just to reinforce, that's the savings even though they're taking on that additional debt. Next slide. This was an interesting project because it was a church in Cortland. It's Cortland, New York. Cortland, the town of Cortland, not the city of Cortland. And this was something where the parishioners were really pushing the church to do something. The next slide talks a little bit about the economics. It wasn't a terribly large project, but again, for the church in this case is saving $3,500 a year. So again, they were able to utilize renewable energy to drive the efficiency of the church and also save money for their parishioners. Next slide. I'm going to go to the next slide as well. This is an important project because for those of you who are familiar with solar financing, right now there are some very significant tax benefits that are provided to people that take on solar, but the benefits are primarily investment tax credits. Investment tax credits come from the federal government, but they only provide benefits to people who have tax liability. In this particular instance, this was a not-for-profit that wanted to do solar, but they couldn't take advantage of the investment tax credit because they had no taxable liability. So what we did is we created a three-party structure where we had the not-for-profit take energy from a solar installation that was put on the building. Then we had the Bank of America finance the cost of the project, but then we had a party in the middle that owned the solar, agreed to sell the solar energy to the not-for-profit. They were able to take advantage of the investment tax credit and share some of that savings with the not-for-profit. So this structure, this three-party structure, has made all the difference in the world in our ability to utilize PACE financing to be able to benefit not only for-profit, but not-for-profit entities as well. Next slide. This project, again, let's flip to the economics. This was a project that was a little under $500,000. This was a situation, this is an assisted living facility in Peekskill, New York. This was not necessarily a project where they saved a lot of money, but what they had was very old infrastructure which was creating a lot of problems for the residents of the facility. And they were facing a financing of almost $500,000. They really didn't have any sources for the funding available to them. PACE made all the difference in the world. So as you can see under the project savings, it was only $600 a year. But if PACE was not available, they would not have been able to undertake this project, which would have been a serious detriment to the residents of the assisted living facility. So, we can't always point to huge economic savings, but we can point to the ability to either save money or undertake a project that couldn't be done any other way. Next slide. So how do you enable PACE? I mean, basically what happens is a municipality, in this case it would be the county, municipality would have to pass a local law where they would adopt PACE through their legislation. They would sign a municipal agreement to become a member of the Energy Improvement Corporation, and then they would request that membership be approved by the Energy Improvement Corporation Board. When EIC was created, it was all primarily volunteers. Now the board is made up entirely of the members. So the board is either town supervisors, it's either mayors, or it's county executives. So the entire board now is made up of the municipal members. So we've shifted from the volunteer structure to the government structure. Next slide. We believe there is no cost to the municipality becoming a member. There are some steps, obviously, that the municipality has to take, and I'll go through that with you as well. But again, there is no variable cost or no additional cost required on the part of the municipality to become a member. Next slide. The duties of the municipality are, in my opinion, I think relatively simple. What we do is we as an entity tell you how much to put on the tax bill and how much money to collect every year. All of the financing is for a fixed term, for a fixed rate of interest, so there's no variation in the amount of money that's collected on a periodic basis, whether it be twice a year or once a year, so there's no surprises. We provide that report to the municipality at least 90 days before the tax bills go out. The municipality then collects that money, just like they do everything else on that tax bill, and then the role, if you will, is to carve out the portion that's dedicated to PACE, and the municipality then has to send a check to our trustee bank, which is the U.S. Bank. And again, this is always probably the most difficult part of the presentation, but the municipality is obligated to make that payment to the Energy Improvement Corporation, just like they're obligated to make any payment to anybody that is levying money against that property. Now, I mentioned I was a town supervisor in Westchester County. Westchester County is the only county in New York where the towns and the cities make everybody whole. In the rest of the state, the county makes everybody whole. So I've been in your shoes, so I understand what it's like to be responsible for paying those charges, whether they're collected or not. But it is an obligation because we do have to treat the PACE line like any other line on the tax bill. Next slide. We don't want to create a loss, obviously, for the municipality, so we've created two funds in order to protect the municipality. Number one is what we call the permanent loss fund. Now, what that means, and I'll try to explain it as simply as possible. If a property owner undertakes a PACE financing and they don't pay, and the municipality then has to collect through some form of legal procedure, like an in rem procedure, against that property, and they are unable to collect the portion of the money that they've paid to cover the non-payment of the taxes, the municipal permanent loss fund would reimburse the municipality. So there would be no loss to the municipality by supporting the PACE financing. In addition, we've created another program called the Municipal Tax Delinquency Fund. Now, what this is this is a program that we've created with the New York Green Bank. It's backed by a $5 million line of credit. And to explain it in the simplest possible terms, what would happen is if the municipality wanted to participate, and nobody has, because there really isn't that much of a record here of late payments, but if the municipality wanted to, they would actually pay a fee to participate in this program. It would be like insurance, and they would be able to protect themselves, so if the property owner didn't pay, they would be able to draw money from that $5 million line of credit to cover their cash flow exposure. If, as expected, there are no losses, and they've basically paid for that benefit through the form of a premium, and they didn't collect any money or they didn't utilize the fund at all, the premium would be reimbursed. So it's sort of like buying insurance, paying a premium, and then not using the insurance and getting your money back. So that there would really be no cost to the municipality other than a $50 fee, which is not refundable. But it would protect the municipality from any cash flow exposure. Next one. You can modify the program. There are municipalities that have become members that put caps on how much they would like to finance. There are municipalities that have made it very clear that they don't want to do any residential and don't want to do any residential in the future. So there are modifications that you could make. The way you would do that is you would request those modifications in a letter to the EIC board requesting membership, and the board would accept those modifications. Next slide. Again, you know, what's important here is that we work very closely with the municipality. So the example I used before is when I did that presentation at the Chamber of Commerce breakfast. We spend a lot of time working with the municipality, getting the word out, getting the contractors trained in the community, because we want to try to keep as many of those dollars in the community as possible and allow for people to be able to utilize the financing. Next. Just to give you a quick overview, this is a list of the municipalities that have become members. The list on the right side, again, is Westchester County, because as I mentioned, because of the property tax laws in Westchester, each town and each city in Westchester had to become a member. Everywhere else in the state, the county becomes a member. Now, there are some examples where, I know in the city of Oneonta, they would become a member automatically under the county. Binghamton did under Broome, the city of Albany did under the county of Albany. But there are situations where, for example, in Erie County, Buffalo would have to become a member and some of the other cities would have to become a member. It depends on whether the city has lien authority over the property and then therefore has the responsibility of collecting those taxes. So in this case, if Otsego County joined, then the entire county would become eligible. So these are the current members. And the next slide, we talk about the members that we're talking about. One quick change here, Chautauqua County did pass a local law. So the EIC board will accept their membership at the September 20th meeting. And these are all the municipalities that we're in various levels of discussion with. The next slide. And again, this is just a map showing you what I've just gone through in the list. Next slide. And again, the next step. So if we wanted to move forward with this, again, the county would have to pass the local law. They would authorize the executive to sign the municipal agreement. They would send a letter requesting membership to the EIC board, and then we would work with the municipality to launch the program, and as I say, get the word out to all of the property owners and get all the contractors trained on how to do the work. And with that, again, I thank you, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Just wondered, the parameters, you said that you could limit, say, the amount of borrowing. What kind of flexibility is there over that limitation? Can you go back and change that limitation year to year? I mean, if you set it at 100,000 and then 2 years down the road you want to raise it to 500,000, can you make that change?
Yeah, you can make that change whenever you like. The only municipality, well, I shouldn't say the only. Tompkins was the first to do it. They capped it at $5 million. The city of Ithaca then followed immediately thereafter and capped it at 5, and Broome County capped it at 5. They were the only municipalities that put a cap on it. Now, we actually had a $5 million project in Tompkins. If we did that, then I don't think they'd want to stop at one project, so they'd have to go back and amend it. But in the original letter, you could put whatever amount you want, and then if you wanted to increase the amount, you would just notify the board that you would authorize them to go a little higher. So you can do that whenever you'd like.
Okay.
Is it one or the other with rebates with NYSERDA, or can you take advantage of both?
You can take advantage of both, but we can't finance a NYSERDA grant. So for example, if you have a $500,000 project, let's say, and they're eligible for a $100,000 grant from NYSERDA, we could finance $400,000. But we can finance the federal piece. So like that example I talked where there was the investment tax credit, if they wanted to make the use of our financing today, even though they'd have to wait 3 years for the federal investment tax credit, they would be able to do that. But we can't finance the NYSERDA portion.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah. I saw the interest rates were all variable. Is it a variable rate over the time period?
It's a variable rate now, like right now, I mean, bond rates right now, they dropped a lot yesterday, but it's based on bond rates, and then we set the rate, and then once we set the rate, it's fixed.
It's fixed for the
So
term,
the financing is fixed for the term, but it'll vary based on when you initiate the financing. It's on a roll there.
Yeah, he is. Strictly
Use
related to
NYSERDA. I've used
that,
NYSERDA
fine,
before,
but
it was good.
otherwise we'll give some other people and come back. Yeah.
So, on the part to make the counties whole, or whoever the taxing, is it whole on the equipment that's on, the equipment is whole on all, say the loan was $300,000, and the property sold for $150,000, plus all the back taxes, that will make it whole on the equipment. So the next person that's involved gets that piece of property.
It only makes it whole, again, the financing must stay with the property for the term.
Okay, that's my question.
Yeah, so it's only the shortfall for the period in which the property owner didn't pay and the point in which you
So
foreclosed on the
the
property.
burden goes forward.
Yeah, the burden goes forward with the new owner. You know, and that's come up. I mean, in public hearings, people have asked me that question, is that, doesn't that make it less attractive to the buyer that they're taking on a property with a debt? The answer to that is no, and the reason why the answer is no is, number one, The bank has already acknowledged the fact that even though they had a security interest in the property, that allowing them to take on a loan, because number one, it's made their collateral more valuable and it's reduced their cost. So obviously there's a benefit to the property having been improved and been more energy efficient. So we believe it actually makes the property more attractive and more marketable.
Len?
That was my line of questioning, but I'm still not following you. So if the property goes in default, in this particular county, we give them 4 years, and it sells, going to Craig's example, of 150,000, but 300,000 is still owed on this PACE financing. We, the county, are on the hook.
If you took over the property and didn't resell it,
We sold it for 100. I think if I followed your analogy right, we sold it for 150,000, but there's 300,000 still left on the loan.
but whoever buys a property has to take on the responsibility of paying the loan. So it's just like, if you buy a piece of property and you know the property tax bill is X amount of dollars. Included in that property tax bill is the PACE charge. So you know going in that when you take over that property, you have that much responsibility for that many years remaining. The only time the municipality would have the obligation to pay it is if they didn't resell the property. So if you foreclosed and you held on to it, then you would have to make good on that payment, just like you'd have to make good to the school district or the town or the city, whoever it might
So
be.
where's the gap part come in, the insurance side?
Right. The fee, the $50 fee, or whatever.
It covers the amount of money that you've laid out. So let's say, for example, the property owner they didn't pay $100,000 of the PACE bill, which is $500,000, and you had to pay that $100,000. Now, when you went to foreclose and you allocated the amount that you collected over how much is owed, and you had an 80% recovery, 20% of that $100,000 would be reimbursed by us. So you would not sustain a loss on the PACE charge of the bill. By the way, just to make it clear, there have been no defaults in PACE financing. When I was CFO of the Power Authority, we did over $100 million a year in energy efficiency, and a good portion of that financing went to companies that were getting economic development power from the Power Authority. We never had a loss. PACE has not had a loss nationally, and I think in non-residential. Residential, they've had some losses, but again, we're not doing residential at the moment. But I think the reason why is because the people who do these types of financings, they pay their bills. They're responsible people. And again, these are people that have not been bankruptcy, they've paid their taxes on time. And it's something important I wanted to say to you, and I don't want to hold you up too long, but what Tompkins did, I think, was very smart. And then Broome followed, and the city of Ithaca. What we're required to do is two things when a financing application comes in Tompkins, Broome, or Ithaca, and then we have to notify the municipality, and then they do two searches. One, they assess the environmental risk, because again, what they don't want to do is take title to a problem where there's an environmental issue. They don't want to take title to that property. So they may not want to foreclose on it if they can't sell it, and they don't want to be in the chain of a potentially responsible party. So they prohibit financing of environmentally risky projects. Also, we don't know the people in the community. So, there's a lot of LLCs out there, and this person owns this property, and they have LLC 123 Main Street, and they're prompt in their payments, but they're not on XYZ LLC. So they can come back to us and say, we know this property owner, they may be current here, but they're not current there, so we're asking you to not do the financing. So we give the municipality every possible protection we can to minimize or mitigate their risk.
So this isn't residential, this is just commercial?
Yeah, right now we cannot do, the only way it can be residential if it's multifamily. Basically, it's residential if it's not a mortgage that could be guaranteed by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, because they're the problem.
Anybody else have a question? Thank you, Jeff.
Hey, thanks very much.